The paradox of happiness. At its core, I think one of the foundational elements of our culture today is this idea that we deserve to be happy. And I think that's a beautiful thing to build a culture on. And we see it everywhere. From the smiley faces on t-shirts and every conceivable consumer product in the 90s, to the more modern cult of positive psychology, to the smiling Amazon boxes, we live in a culture where happiness is more of a right than a privilege. And the lack of that at any given point in time is usually considered to be a problem. When we see someone who's unhappy, most of us will have the knee-jerk reaction of wanting to fix it. After all, this is what our nation, the United States, was built on. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and of course, the pursuit of happiness. But what if, for one moment, we stop and look? What if the pursuit of happiness is part of the problem? After all, if I work relentlessly at happiness, then usually, in my experience, what I'm left with is just relentless work without much of the happiness that I actually wanted. Back when I was working in corporate America, making good money and working with brands like Disney, Amgen, Hulu, you name it, that was also the period in my life when I was the least happy, the least satisfied, the most frustrated with how my life was going. And therein lies the paradox of happiness. How can we achieve something that which, in the very act of pursuing it, we lose it? Well, where we can start is beginning to look at the brain. What does happiness actually look like? So, science has proven that happiness is the result of several neurotransmitters, that is, chemicals in your brain that are responsible for helping you feel certain things and do certain activities. Now, the four that are most closely linked with happiness are serotonin, which is the feeling of being valued or important, of being a contribution to someone's life. Dopamine, literally the pleasure chemical. Oxytocin, which is responsible for that feeling of bonding, trust, or closeness, and endorphins, which are typically released in response to pain, or when we've been exercising for a prolonged period of time. It's responsible for that feeling of catharsis after we finish crying. It's responsible for that runner's high. But altogether, the big problem with brain chemistry is that it can be very fleeting. For instance, dopamine has a half-life of about 2 minutes, and while that can be extended, our brain has a limited supply of each neurotransmitter, and those are gradually replenished over time. And what we're really left with is the fact that the very foundation of happiness is temporary. It's not designed to be permanent. And moreover, this doesn't even account for habituation, which is a well-known psychological effect. For instance, with any drug or substance, the more that we get of it, the more our brains and our bodies adapt to it. We need more and more of it to feel the same way. And for happiness, that means that our single greatest strength of adaptability is used against us. What makes us happy in one moment becomes a new baseline for disappointment. The very next, we are constantly hungry for the next hit of happiness, and assuming we're good at getting happiness, it gets harder and harder to achieve over time. So what do we do with this catch-22 of a situation? Well, the answer might lie in learning to let go of control. In Gregory Burns' book, Satisfaction, The Science of Finding True Fulfillment, Burns points out that the fundamental issue that we face when it comes to happiness is this. Seeking happiness, in modern times, is usually about control. If we can control our sadness, then we'll finally be happy. if we can control our income, our surroundings, our neighbors, if we can control which people are attracted to us and which are not, if we can control who wants to give us money, then and only then can we be truly happy. Or at least that's how it goes in most of our heads. But really, when we look at it, what happens when we get to our goal? What happens when the uncontrolled becomes controlled? Well, one could argue that we get a few minutes of happiness, and then it starts to slowly fade away. Because ultimately, the human brain is wired to need and seek novelty. And when we get to our goal, the novelty is gone. It's one of the many reasons why so many Americans struggle so much with quarantine. There is no room for novelty. It's been replaced by endless repetitions in the same environment. In addition, in-person, meaningful human connection is gone, and that is easily the easiest source of the neurotransmitters that contribute the most to happiness. So in essence, all of the most easily obtainable sources of our birthright of happiness have been removed. Now, that's not going to be the case for everyone. But here's what really matters. If we can let go of the need to control our emotions, to let go of the feeling of needing happiness, and we suppose for just one moment that there's nothing wrong with feeling exactly what we're feeling, then the suffering and pain of comparison, the suffering and pain of not being happy, that can finally dissipate. And that leaves us open to the most critical piece of this puzzle: appreciation. While I can't be happy all of the time, I can appreciate and luxuriate in the simple, sensual pleasures of simply existing. From the comforting, quiet click and clack of my keyboard as I type, to the delicious sensations of perfectly warm water running between my toes, appreciation is all about finding novelty in the day-to-day. It's not seeking for a different future or end result or reality, but simply choosing to enjoy what you're doing right here and right now. It's recognizing that while there's always room to grow and to obtain the next bigger and better thing, that it's not as life or death as our brains sometimes make it out to be. There's no emergency here. That there is value in this moment, in who we are right now, and exactly what we're doing. And when we can begin to accept that, then we can also begin to escape the paradox of happiness too.